Are we starting at
it doesn't, okay, we can go this way.
If you look at it from an international perspective, I think that we're starting to see a groundswell of interest in international and global perspectives in education. Actually, it's been here for a long time, but I think maybe now it's being recognized politically, both at the state level and at the national level. For the first time in the Ohio Department of Education, we have somebody whose job is international education. And for the first time, some of us here on this stage also work on a strategic planning advisory board to try to bring forward international and a global perspective to the students in Ohio. At the national level, for the first time, the Obama administration has named somebody at the deputy assistant level to be in charge of international education and foreign language education. This has never happened before, so Andre Lewis, who's coming to Kent State next fall, is the first person who has ever had that high of an office, particularly for an international global perspective in education. So you can see both from the state level and from the national level that international education is part of what they see as reform.
I think in my interpretation of reform when it comes to education, it has to do with making things better and constantly improving. So there are a number of schools throughout this state that are doing a very good job, that their students are performing at the highest levels and can compete on a world stage. And then there are a lot of schools where that's not happening. And what we'd like to see is to make sure that what's happening at good schools can be replicated and shared throughout the entire state so that all students have an opportunity to get the best possible education. So we, when it comes to what's happening here in the state, there's a lot that's been happening recently. Just this past summer, the state passed a number of reforms toward our public schools. And at the national level, as just was mentioned, President Obama, with his Race to the Top competition, I'm sure some of you have heard of. There's another innovation, I forget what it's called, an innovation fund that's another competition between states that's happening now. So it seems that, and the National Governors Association is also involved with the national standards so that the schools throughout or states throughout the country all have similar standards as far as what's being taught in the classroom. So there seems to be, I think that reform is something that's been happening, that's always ongoing, but it does seem that now that when you look at what's happening at the national level, and particularly here in the state of Ohio, that reform is the buzzword of the day. So we try and interpret what that actually means and what we would like to see happen in our schools, and we do that, my organization, by working with parents and teachers and school administrators on what specifically in your school district would you like to see happen. We take that information and see where there's overlap in other school districts, and then we formulate policies that we believe would be helpful for all schools throughout the state. So that's where we stand on an organization on what reform is, and but ultimately it's making sure that all schools have the best possible education.
For me, reform means taking the form of something and changing it, either in terms of the topics people deal with, who is engaged in it, where it happens. And so over the years, we've worked very closely with Mark and other school superintendents to try to reform teacher preparation. A couple of years ago, Mark and the other superintendents told me they weren't satisfied with the people we were preparing to be school principals. And so together, we chose new topics. Other people did the training, the preparation. We did it in different places. We evaluated it differently, and we set the mark and the standards differently, and they worked directly with their school superintendent. Another example is right now, we're not very satisfied with the number or the quality of math and science teachers we prepare. So we're taking a whole undergraduate major in biology, chemistry, history, whatever, where you get to be a high school teacher, and we're blending in all the preparation for the teachers as well as being a major. So after 4 years, you can get your major in your science or mathematics and also get your license as a teacher. And so that will require the science professors to work more closely with the education professors and be out in the schools and places where there are really good examples of science and math teaching and learning. So for me, again, reform means to take the form and change the form.
It was mentioned about the standards, and in fact, in this state, probably 15 years ago, everybody had their own way of, own things they wanted to teach. And we've moved, and sometimes kicking and dragging folks along to have state standards. And as Julian mentioned, we're now on the move to try to have national standards. Should we be going to international standards, or is that a logical next step after we might move to the national standards?
Well, I think we ought to have international standards, and we ought to use an international scale. As Linda knows, and Jay knows, and others, we're involved in Shaker, an international baccalaureate program, which are international standards. But I want to reflect just a little bit on standards and national standards and national tests. I go back and forth all the time because different school districts have different tests, different standards, different curriculums, different states have that and so forth. And I've long thought, well, gee, we should just have, you know, standards for the country or international standards. But always in the back of my mind is this gnawing feeling about democracy and totalitarian states and brainwashing and all these kind of far out things that hopefully would never happen. But I don't know how comfortable I am having the federal government decide totally what should go on in a first, second, third, fourth, fifth grade classroom, especially when I read reports about Pakistan and Afghanistan and the way the schools are taken over and the way young people are just fed propaganda. So one side of me says, this is really terrific, we ought to do this, and hopefully that'll move us away from the quality of your school really depends on where you live. I mean, it ought to be perfect for everybody. But there's that little piece. I don't know if others think about that. I don't know.
One of the things that I've seen in a lot of my international work is that ministries of education from around the world are looking to America about how to decentralize their education. Right. At the same time, here in America, we're looking to have more federal control. So it's kind of a little bit mind-boggling that we're trying to borrow from each other and we're not really looking at what's best. Along with standards, another thing that I see is where there are nationwide tests, and in many, many, many countries where higher education is free, the competition for the high school college entrance exam is really fierce, and it absolutely erodes public education K-12. And the reason that it does that is that for those students who have money, the parents pay for prep schools so that they can pass the national exams, and so you get even more of a have and have-nots than I think you have here, where some of our schools are good and some of our schools are not, but at least within a school, a student who wants to work hard has the chance of doing that. And I think that's a problem in a lot of countries. With a lot of the visiting scholars that we have at Kent State, we hear that issue over and over again, that they don't even study in public school, they just wait and go to the prep schools and just learn to pass the test. And I think that in standard, one of the dangers is that the information that we need to have in today's society is just changing so rapidly